You know, for decades, sports fans have been arguing about one single question. But while everyone's busy fighting over who the GOAT is, we're going to do something a little different. We're going on a quest for the opposite, the WOAT, the worst of all time. So, how do we even begin to crown basketball's most infamous player?
I mean, you know the names, right? The debate for the greatest of all time. It's like a pillar of sports talk. Is it Michael Jordan and that flawless finals record? Or is it LeBron James with his insane longevity and just all-around dominance? The arguments, they never, ever end.
But this brings us to a much trickier and honestly, a way more fascinating question. Who is the worst NBA player ever? It's such a loaded discussion because let's be real, even the worst player in the NBA is still one of the best basketball players on the entire planet. But that's exactly what makes this whole investigation so much fun.
All right, so to find our answer, we first have to figure out what worst even means. And as you're about to see, defining it is surprisingly hard. It's not as simple as just, picking the guy with the lowest scoring average. It goes way deeper than that.
We can really break this down into two main categories. On one hand, you've got the bust. This is the player who was hyped up, drafted super high, and then just spectacularly failed to live up to any of it. Then you have the detriment, which is the player who, according to the data, actively made their team worse whenever they stepped on the court. Let's dig into both. Let's start with the most common answer you'll probably hear for the worst player ever, the high-profile draft bust. I mean, this is where the story is everything, and that huge fall from grace is exactly what makes him so infamous. And for a lot of people, Exhibit A is Anthony Bennett, the #1 overall pick in 2013, and his selection was seen as a massive reach even at the time. He got traded by the Cavaliers after just one season, bounced between 4 teams in 4 years, and was totally out of the league by 2017. His career averages were a shocking 4.4 points and 3.1 rebounds a game. For a #1 pick, wow. And before Bennett, there was Kwame Brown, drafted #1 overall by the Wizards straight out of high school. He basically became the cautionary tale for taking young, unproven players. Now, he did manage to carve out a 12-year career, but he never developed the skills or the mindset to match that draft position, and he often became a punchline for his, let's just say, questionable on-court decisions. Okay, but what's really wild about this slide is the context. Darko Milicic wasn't just a bust, he was a franchise-altering mistake. The Pistons took him at #2, right after LeBron in that legendary 2003 draft, passing on 3 future Hall of Famers, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. Just imagine the dynasty that could have been. Instead, Darko barely played on their championship team and is now apparently a farmer in Serbia. So reputation and draft status, that's one thing. But what about the cold, hard data? Let's switch gears and see how some players were statistically, measurably, a total drain on their teams.
To do this, we're going to use an advanced stat called box plus minus, or BPM. It's actually pretty simple. It estimates how many points a player adds or subtracts from their team's score over 100 possessions. A positive number? That's good. A negative number? Well, that means you're making your team actively worse just by being out there.
And that brings us to this guy, Michael Olowokandi, the first overall pick back in 1998. He was a classic bust, drafted ahead of legends like Dirk Nowitzki, Paul Pierce, and Vince Carter. But his story gets so much worse when you actually look at the numbers.
In the 2000 season, Olowokandi produced a net plus-minus of -70. That's the single worst individual season recorded since 1974. This wasn't just bad, it was historically detrimental. He had a BPM of -6, which means he was hurting his team by about 6.5 points per game, and the Clippers still played him for major minutes? So here's the crucial point. To have the worst career impact, a player needs this really unique combination. They have to be just good enough to stay in the league and keep getting minutes, but consistently bad enough to rack up a massive negative impact over many, many years.
This list really drives that point home. According to this metric, Kevin Willis is the WOAT, having cost his teams a net of 330 points over his long career. But look at some of the other names here. Kevin Duckworth was a 2-time All-Star, and Juwan Howard is widely seen as a pretty solid player. But they both played a huge number of minutes while being slight net negatives, and that impact really adds up over time.
And just to put that -330 into perspective, look at the other end of the spectrum. LeBron James has a career net plus-minus of over positive 12,000. The gap between the best and the statistically most detrimental players is, well, it's absolutely staggering.
Okay, so we've covered the busts and the statistical drains, but there's a third category, players who are infamous for other reasons. Some became fan favorites because they were bench warmers, while others were so obscure they're basically statistical ghosts.
You cannot talk about famous bench warmers without mentioning the White Mamba, Brian Scalabrine. His on-court production was minimal, but he became a cult hero. And this famous quote from him, it perfectly captures the reality of the NBA. The skill gap between the worst player in the league and an average fan is astronomically larger than the gap between that same player and an all-time great like LeBron.
But what if a player is the worst simply because they contributed, well, nothing? These are the players whose careers were so brief they barely even register, making them contenders for the WOA title through sheer insignificance. Everybody, meet Norm Greken. His entire NBA career, as you can see right here, consists of 1 game played, 1 minute on the court, and 1 personal foul. That's it. No points, no rebounds, no assists. A perfect statistical 0, except for the foul. I mean, is that the worst? Or maybe it's Chris McRae. In 5 career games, he logged 12 total minutes and also failed to record a single point, rebound, or assist. But he did manage to post one of the worst player efficiency ratings, that's a measure of per minute production, of all time, a staggering negative 20.7. So in his very brief time on the court, he was impressively inefficient. So, after looking at the busts, the statistical drains, and these obscure footnotes, where do we land? Who gets the crown for the worst of all time? Well, we've really seen 3 compelling cases, haven't we? Is it the draft bust, like Anthony Bennett, whose failure is defined by all that squandered potential? Is it the statistical drain, like Kevin Willis, who hurt his teams more than anyone over a long career? Or is it the obscure footnote, like Norm Greken, a player who barely even existed in the NBA record books? And the truth is, there's no single right answer. The title of WOAT is kind of like a mirror. It reflects what we, as fans, consider the biggest sin in sports. Is it failing to meet expectations? Is it actively hurting your team's performance? Or is it simply not making an impact at all? So I'll just leave you with this. The next time you're arguing with your friends about the worst player ever, don't just throw out names. Ask them, what's your definition of failure? Is it unfulfilled potential, a negative impact on the court, or is it just being completely forgotten? Because how you answer that question, well, that changes everything.